Hi, this is Remembering the Past, the show where we talk about people who've died recently who've had a profound effect on our history, our society, or our culture. Tonight we're going to start out with Stephen Hillenburg, who died recently at the age of 57. Stephen Hillenburg was the creator of that beloved denizen of the deep, star of stage and screen, SpongeBob SquarePants. SpongeBob has been entertaining children and adults for the better part of 2 decades on television, in the movies, and even on Broadway. Steve Hillenburg was an Oklahoma boy who moved out to California, and he took his love of marine biology and combined it with his love of animation to create SpongeBob. Here's the Today Show on Steve Hillenburg and SpongeBob SquarePants.
Who lives in a pineapple under the sea?
Nobody ever thought a sponge could make such a splash. But Stephen Hillenburg's iconic character SpongeBob SquarePants and his friends of Bikini Bottom will go down as some of the most beloved cartoons of all time.
What's your secret?
Hillenburg first introduced SpongeBob in the 80s, using it as a teaching tool during his time as a marine biology instructor. His artistic abilities would eventually lead him down an entirely different career path, where he'd combine his love of marine life with animation.
Today's the big day, Gary.
The first episode of SpongeBob SquarePants airing on Nickelodeon back in 1999.
Coming right up, sir.
Carry on.
The cartoon soaking up so much success, its popularity extending to the big screen. First in 2004, then again in 2015.
Whoa! Excuse me, do you know where we can get a Krabby Patty around here? Uh-oh.
The ever-optimistic yellow character even making it to the Great White Way in December 2017. And the Today Show Plaza earlier this year. SpongeBob SquarePants, the Broadway musical, earning 12 Tony nominations during its short run. This morning, Nickelodeon remembering Hillenburg for the sense of humor and innocence he brought to the show, writing in a statement, "His utterly original characters in the world of Bikini Bottom will long stand as a reminder of the value of optimism, friendship, and the limitless power of imagination." A visionary creator who helped shape popular culture. For today, Kristen Dahlgren, NBC News, New York.
Here's Steve Hillenburg talking about the genesis of SpongeBob SquarePants.
First with art, I didn't know really what I wanted to do. And with marine biology, I just thought, well, this is a possible career and it's tangible. Obviously, SpongeBob is a comedy, but it really was inspired by me liking marine science. I focused on that, and I never thought the two would come together, actually. But what happened was I was working at the Marine Institute, the Orange County Marine Institute, right, and at that time period, animation started booming. It eventually led me to go to Cal Arts. I ended up going to graduate school for animation. Joe Murray, who created Rocko's Modern Life, saw my films, and he asked me if I would like to direct on his show. And that experience was really important for me because I really wouldn't have known how to put a show together without that experience. And then one day, this guy, Martin Olson, who was a writer on the show, he comes into my office and he sees this comic book that I created when I worked at the Marine Institute. It's called The Intertidal Zone, and it's basically to teach about tide pools. It started me thinking, if I'm going to do a show, I would do it about these invertebrates and these crazy animals that exist in the ocean, and it would be the perfect fusion of the things that I did. It was that moment where I said, maybe I should pursue this, go down this path.
A lot of people are glad that he went down that path. We're going to move on now to Pete Shelley, who died recently at the age of 63. He was the lead singer and writer for the British punk rock band Buzzcocks. Now, I have to be honest with you, Buzzcocks are not my cup of tea, so I'm going to turn it over to Matthew Bannister at BBC4 Last Word to talk about Pete Shelley.
Pete Shelley was the lead singer of the influential Bolton punk band Buzzcocks, who came to fame in the 1970s. He wrote many of their songs, including their biggest hit, Ever Fallen in Love with Someone You Shouldn't Have. Buzzcocks were getting together when the Sex Pistols first started performing. Pete recalled helping them to get a gig in Manchester.
The Sex Pistols were great because they got everybody out of the woodwork. And everybody, in the light of day, everybody else saw that they were other people who liked this kind of music. And so it just was just a simple step then to actually networking with people, and things started happening, like us putting on the gig in Manchester for the Sex Pistols. We didn't know the Manchester music scene. We didn't really hang out in Manchester all that much. But there was a hall in Manchester and it cost £32 to hire. So we hired it and Sex Pistols came up and played.
Buzzcocks supported the Pistols on their second Manchester gig a month later. Pete was very clear about his band's name, a view echoed by the journalist Paul Morley.
When we chose the name, we decided not to have the in front.
I think the very delicate nature of the lack of the definitive article was a very symbolic thing, and they weren't the Buzzcocks because, of course, that simply means 1964 and the Kinks. And the great thing about Buzzcocks is that they come along and they had an element of being a guitar band with bass and drums and everything, but large amounts of what they did was incredibly experimental and didn't need the, because the is a traditional motif.
We could press 1,000 records and sell them a £1 each. You know, that was our business model. It adhered to the principles of what punk was. And that was, if you can do it yourself, then what's stopping you?
Pete was a very modest person.
The music writer John Robb.
And a very modest kind of songwriter in a way. I mean, he wrote very complex melodic pieces, but made them seem like they'd just been knocked out on a guitar in 2 minutes flat, which I think he was so talented he probably could do that. We were going around the internet, of course you'd listen to Buzzcocks all night, but we found this kind of classical version of Ever Fallen in Love, and it's an absolutely brilliant melody, but when you hear it played by an orchestra, you think, wow, it's actually a really complex piece of music. He didn't need to shout. He wrote these fantastically beautiful melodies. He dealt with the quixotic subject of love, and the complicated subject of love, and he made it so simple. All this frailty and confusion of love, and he wrote all these brilliant songs about it with an honesty and abrasive honesty, which in a way is exactly what punk should have been. I'll maintain this to the day I die, that Pete Shelley was one of the greatest melody writers this country's ever produced. You know, he's up there with the Beatles. Buzzcocks got big, but they should have had every single one of those singles should be number one. You listen to them now and think, how come that only got to number 22 in the charts? It's a crime.
The singing of Pete Shelley.
On a par with the Beatles, I don't know. I want to move on now to Laszlo Lorand, who died recently at the age of 95. Laszlo Lorand was one of the preeminent biochemists in America, member of the National Academy of Sciences. He is best known for his work in blood coagulation. He was a nice Jewish boy from Hungary, and after World War II he studied at the University of Budapest. His mentors included Albert Szent-Györgyi, who was awarded the Nobel Prize in Medicine or Physiology in 1937 for the isolation of vitamin C. Another one of his mentors was Kamil Laki, who recruited him to the University of Budapest to Szent-Györgyi's lab when Lorand was a medical student. In 1948, Laki and Lorand isolated a blood coagulation factor that was independent of previous known mechanisms for blood coagulation. At the time, it was called the Laki-Lorand factor. It was later renamed as Factor XIII, and it's an integral part of the blood coagulation system. Factor XIII helps strengthen fibrin, which is the binding substance that seals a clot to prevent further bleeding. It's important to realize that the clotting mechanism has to work in a coordinated fashion, with a lot of things being turned on sequentially, but not work so haphazardly that you'll get blood clots in situations where you don't want them. Here in one of his lectures, Dr. Lorand talks a little bit about that.
This is what evolution produced to make the human birth clotting system far more complicated than the first model, whereby you would expect the fibrinogen could be directly cross-linked by a single enzyme to become a stabilized clot. No, you have to rely on all sorts of feed-forward regulations and controls to make the system coordinated in a timely fashion to produce the stabilized clot when it's needed and not to produce it when it's not needed.
In 1948, Dr. Lorand left Budapest as part of the brain drain that left Hungary during the post-war communist rule. Many of the Hungarian scientists originally settled in England. We talked about that when we did the Gustav Born podcast earlier this year. I refer you to that. And Dr. Lorand settled at the University of Leeds, where he got his PhD. A couple years later, he emigrated to the United States. He originally settled at Wayne State University and then came to Evanston, Illinois, to Northwestern. He was a Northwestern professor for nearly 60 years, one of the founding members of the Department of Biochemistry, Cell and Molecular Biology. He spent a lot of his time in his later years at the Woods Hole Research Institute in Massachusetts. Dr. Lorand also happened to be the father of my cousin's wife, so I saw him at a lot of holiday gatherings. I had coffee with him several times, rode bikes with him once, and he was fascinating to talk to. He was one of the last links to the old world Central European biochemistry system, while at the same time being part of the modern 21st century cell biology world. He kept up on the literature even into his 80s and 90s, and he was literate and conversant in a number of topics, even outside the sciences. The thing I enjoyed about talking with him the most was his stories about the people that he was familiar with, and he was familiar with a lot of the giants of 20th century science. He had stories about St. Georgi, having coffee with Linus Pauling, or playing tennis with Gerald Weissman. Definitely an important transition figure in 20th century science. And personally, I'll miss him. Well, I'm going to close on that note. I want to thank my producer and IT genius, Sid Tepps. I want to close tonight with Ken Berry, who died recently at the age of 85. Not the White Sox center fielder, but the dancer turned comedian. When Ken Berry was in the Army, his staff sergeant noticed that he was a great dancer. That staff sergeant happened to be a fellow named Leonard Nimoy, and he recommended him for show business. That's your Ken Berry trivia. He had a great role in the Dick Van Dyke Show as a choreographer, and then he went on to be in the Andy Griffith stable for a couple years under Sheldon Leonard. When Andy Griffith called it quits, they brought him on to star in Mayberry RFD, which wasn't a very good show, by the way. Later on in his career, he was a co-star in another not-so-great show, Mama's Family. But who are we kidding? Ken Berry's opus magnum was as Colonel Wilton Parmenter, the commanding officer on F Troop, one of the 1960s great surreal comedies with Forrest Tucker and Larry Storch, Edward Everett Horton, and Frank DeCova, and also his sometimes girlfriend Wrangler Jane, played by the attractive Melanie Patterson. Here, Ken Berry talks a little bit about how he got on F Troop.
But I was up for something called F Troop, and I was kind of disappointed, but until I actually got it and got into it, and it was the time of my life. And it was just great. I played a man who was a private in the Civil War on the Union side. As it says in the opening song, he sneezed or something in a battle, and the troops thought that he was rallying them. And so they had this big victory. And so he was promoted to captain and assigned to a remote post out west someplace. And there's these two guys, a sergeant and a corporal named O'Rourke and Agarn. And they were played by Forrest Tucker and Larry Storch, who became dear friends. We just had laughs all day long. Those guys want to make you laugh. What a great way to make a living. People trying to make you laugh.
Sergeant, time for me to take command. F Troop all present accounted for, sir. Good work, Corporal.
The end of the Civil War was near when quite accidentally a hero who sneezed abruptly ceased retreat and reversed it to victory. His Medal of Honor pleased and thrilled his proud little family troop. While pinning it on, some blood was spilled, and so it was planned he'd command F Troop before they resumed with a bang and a boom. F Troop!
Indeed!